welcome you all to Spark FX 2021 in this very, very special presentation. I'm really, really excited to be here with Mr. Phil Tippett. We are celebrating 30 years of DragonHeart. It's hard to believe that it has been 30 years since the release of this film, but it has. So I'm very excited to spend a little bit of time with you and talk about this amazing little movie. I say little because at the time, like you look at it now and it feels very little, but I can only imagine what went into it at the time that you were making it 30 years ago. But before we start with that, I wanted to get a little bit of background about yourself, and for those that don't know the work that you've done. I can't imagine anybody not knowing who you are and the work that you've done, but there's always somebody out in the crowd that doesn't know who Phil Tippett is, which is surprising to me. But I thought I'd want to start with, where your passion for film started and for stop motion, and how you kind of got into the business.
Well, when I was 5 years old, somebody had King Kong on TV, the 1933 Cooper Schoensack version of Kong, and I remember watching it from behind a chair. I was like really, I guess, scared, but I was fascinated by it, and that kind of launched me into a lifelong interest in dinosaurs that I studied, constantly, and it kind of became an amateur paleontologist and would seek out paleontologists and whatnot. But then in 1958, Ray Harryhausen's Seventh Voyage of Sinbad was theatrically released. And that kind of just changed everything for me. It was like I got struck by a bolt of lightning. And it took me a number of years to figure out what the technique was that he used. But I could tell that it was not people in Godzilla outfits, and I really was attracted to the strangeness of stop motion animation, and which I still am a lot more. I like stop motion a lot more than I like computer graphics stuff. So yeah, and so I worked on Star Wars, the first 3 Star Wars, and, RoboCops and Jurassic Park, and, Starship Troopers and all of that stuff. And after working for Lucasfilm for about, for the first 3 Star Wars and for Dragon Slayer, I started my own studio in the early to mid 80s, Tippett Studio, and worked independently there. I did some jobs for ILM, sculpting some of the characters for Howard the Duck and the Golden Child. Then I'd take those over to ILM and we'd shoot them with the GoGo Motion technology.
I'm curious, what was the motivation for starting your own studio?
It was always my dream. I remember in the, oh God, when was it? In the early to mid 70s, Dennis Muren and John Berg and Tom Santamon came over to my apartment in Venice, California, and we were talking about what we wanted to do in the future. And I told them that I wanted to have my own studio in Berkeley, which was impossible. So I could make my own films. It was just this ridiculous dream. And that's what happened somehow, magically. When George moved everything up from LA to the Bay Area, I moved back to Berkeley. And over the years, I made, money and saved it. And I bought a bunch of lighting and grip equipment and had a garage they set up, and I made about a 12-minute dinosaur movie called Prehistoric Beast with that. And then, I just kept getting, other jobs. My benefactor was John Davison, the producer of RoboCop and Starship Troopers. Among other things, he produced Airplane and Piranha and tons of stuff. But he was a big stop motion fan. And so when we did RoboCop or RoboCop 2 or whatnot, shooting film, he would let me keep all of the equipment that I needed to buy. And so I built my studio out of, John, because it was actually in his best interest as well, because, the studio would never realize that, where that money went anyhow. And they assumed it all was rental, and so I kept it. And then if I had other projects to do with John, and then I had a turnkey studio that I was ready to go into. I bought a warehouse space in Berkeley that was about 2,000 square feet, a little bit under that. And then we built a loft for editorial and projection upstairs and started our studio, me and my wife, Jules.
Wow. Okay, that's amazing. So let's talk a little bit about DragonHeart. So Rob Cohen comes to you with this idea to make this movie. You've already done dragons in the past. You had done the Dragon and Willow and Dragon Slayer. Did you have to be sold on the idea of making this movie, or were you kind of gung-ho from the beginning? What was kind of the process of coming on board, and what was it about the project that appealed to you?
Well, it was kind of important for me to take it on, in that, we had done Jurassic Park, and ILM did all of the real heavy lifting on that in terms of rendering and compositing. And we primarily did the raptor scene and the T-Rex paddock and the animatics for the show using conventional stop motion animation. Then everything turned to computer graphics, and we'd done a few small shows, like, I think Tremors 2, and I forget what else. Three Wishes for Martha Coolidge, and that was our first foray into as a studio that was turning out all of the scenes and shots using computer graphics. But there weren't hardly any computer graphics animators available. There were no schools in the US that taught computer graphics. The only schools were, I think it was Sheridan in Canada, and most of the animators came from Sheridan. They were Canadians. And so I was kind of at a loss. Now, what we had messed around with somewhat, and Craig Hayes, who was my partner at the time, was a brilliant engineer, and Craig designed Ed 209 and the Kane robots for RoboCop 2. And he had a brilliant engineering mind, and so he put together one of the very first motion capture outfits. And so I built it to human scale, and I hired a friend of mine who is a mime, a movement expert, to come in, and he put the suit on, and we would motion capture his performance. And then some of the guys that were working in the model shop or machining were interested in the computer graphics side. So they would take that raw information and just maybe clean it up, or if something needed to be accelerated a little bit, or there were like baubles on his hands, this creature's hands, they could animate those. And that gave them the skill to actually become like really good CG animators. It was Blair Clark who built, along with Tom Santamon, many of the armatures that I used for stop motion projects, and Pete Koenig, who I'd worked with for a number of years, who sculpted the DragonHeart dragon. So, and then, I don't remember how exactly it worked out, but it was something like Rob was not happy with the ILM designs for the dragon, and he showed them to me, and they were pretty terrible. And so he asked me to come up with some designs, which I did. I had Pete make a number of different maquettes. You know, it could be this, it could be that, it could be this, it could be that. When I went down and well, before that, I went down for a meeting with Rob and what was her name? De Laurentiis, the producer.
I think it's Martha.
I don't know. So anyway, I'll remember in a bit. And made my proposal for what to do. I said, you know, this thing should have roughly an ape's face because it needs to deliver a lot of dialogue. So it should have that kind of prognathism that would allow the muscles to actually articulate. And I proposed that I think the ILM guys pretty much use the same kind of design that I use for Dragon Slayer, where it walked on its wings. And I proposed that the wings were separate and walked on 4 feet, so it could sit back on his haunches, and as he was delivering dialogue, could use his hands to help, you know. And I brought some pictures of some oriental sculptures of, you know, the idea. And of course, you show an idea to people, and, you know, even though they're looking at it, they just think, well, that's not going to be in my movie. And the producer just said, it looks like a fucking foo dog. It was like, yeah, it is a foo dog, but, you know, this is just for talk. Anyway, Rob backed me up. And so, yeah, I had Pete design a bunch of little sculpting maquettes. And it could be this, it could be that, it could be this, it could be that. And I was working at the time, well, the ILM supervisor on that show at the time was Steve Price. Who later died of pancreatic cancer. Actually, he died on that movie. And we went up to Rob's cabin in Lake Tahoe, and I showed Rob a number of the maquettes. And yeah, we just started whittling it down from there. And one of the things that ILM did in their design was they did what they had done based off Stan Winston's maquettes for Jurassic Park. And the dinosaurs, if you look at their outline, they're all very smooth. And so the DragonHeart dragon that ILM had designed was very smooth. And it was like, that was wrong. You know, the thing really needs to be highly textured and multicolored and kind of a spectral being with lots of spines on it. And that totally wigged ILM out. And because nobody had made a CG character that complicated before. And they actually, I had trouble on Jurassic Park with the technology, some of the technology guys at ILM, because they didn't understand what we were doing with these input devices that we were using to manipulate the dinosaurs for the Tyrannosaurus and the raptor scenes. And they would be all, you know, articulated skeletons that would plug into the computer, and you see a wireframe on the computer, and you'd move it here and the wireframe would move there. And they would call up and they would go, this looks terrible. This is ridiculous, you know? And I'm like, what are you talking about? It looks really good. You know, we need some secondary animation to put on it, but it looks great. And they go, no, it's terrible. It shouldn't look like that. I was like, what are you guys looking at anyway? And, well, we're looking at the function curves, and they shouldn't look like that. And, you know, the function curves are these things that kind of look like the underground, and it shows like all the various rotations, these lines that interweave in and out. And as the Canadian guys had been trained, they were mostly trained to do like conventional Disney so-called classic animation and flying logos and stuff like that. So they did these boilerplate things, and the expectation was that the function curves should look really nice and smooth. However, if you are physically, putting together a performance of a character that's supposed to, represent something living that's not a cartoon character, it's really complicated what happens if you're going to throw a ball. Everything that I'm doing now, boom, involves like many, many, many different kinds of joints. And intellectually, you can't figure that out. But doing things in stop motion, you can physically sculpt the thing so it feels right. And so it was important that with these input devices that we get that kind of an effect. And what they saw were all these broken, jagged lines that were like really rough. And they didn't even look at the picture. They were just looking at this was the techno end of guys. I mean, the creative guys and Dennis, totally got it, but the scientists did not. Not all of the scientists, Craig Hayes designed the input devices with Brian Knepp at ILM and Rick Sayre, who later went on to Pixar, and they were like brilliant. Rick's a genius. And they got it, and really, along with Craig, built these input devices. So that's what we use. But when we got onto Dragon's Lair, I designed this very complicated thing that they called, I heard later anecdotally, they called it Tippett's Curse. They thought somehow I was getting even with them for them rubbing my nose in it back in the day, which was the furthest thing from my mind. I was just trying to design something to look cool.
So can you talk a little bit about why it was so important for you to be on DragonHeart? Was it something like, did you have was it something to do with the design and getting it right because you didn't feel it was quite right for Jurassic Park, or why was it that you thought it was really important that you were on this project?
Well, aside from the paycheck, it was we needed to get our feet wet with computer graphics, and this was an easy way to do it in that what Rob hired me, Rafaela de Laurentiis, what Rob and Rafaela had hired me to do, in addition to the design, was to create some animatics. And so we were going to do those with computer graphics. But again, I did not have competent computer graphics animators because they didn't exist except at ILM, really. And so what did we do? It was actually kind of tricky because for the Dragon, I hired my friend Leonard Pitt, who was a movement expert. We would hook him up to these motion capture suits that Craig had built, and I would direct his performance, and we just do a performance for the arms, and we just do a performance for the legs, and we just do a performance for the wings. And then we would glue all of those things together, and then Pete and Blair would go in and begin to their further training to become like totally competent computer graphics animators, and they would stitch the thing together and smooth it out and glue it together. So, and we did very simple renders, but it was a really great way to kind of wade into the deep end by starting in the shallow end first. And so it was important in that regard as well. And it's always fun to do that kind of stuff too.
I think it's really interesting because like you jumped into animatics right at the beginning of that sort of technology. And I'm curious, how important was that for either like for fine tuning the design of the dragon, if at all, or why were the animatics so helpful? Why did you feel that you needed to jump into that for this particular project?
Well, it was what Rob and Rafaela wanted. They wanted a blueprint. And of course, along the way, as you're working out all of the logistics of how things fit together, you'll realize, oh, this joint from here to here should be longer, or the fingers, the hands need to be bigger, whatever, the wings were a big deal. And so I hired this guy, Ron Holzhausen, who has a company called Scientific Arts Engineering, and he had to design a wing that could fold up against the body and not break the form. And it was a really complicated, I don't even know how he did it. It was a really complicated way of folding the wing. And so that wing design took a great deal of time because it needed to be a big wing. The dragon eye design was really kind of beefy, and to pull off it flying, it needed to have like a really big wings as a foil. The dragon, Slayer dragon, was very skinny, and very much like a kind of a pterodactyl. So the wings didn't have to be super big. They could be light. I mean, the puppet that I used on Dragon Slayer was the walking dragon was about 2.5 feet long, but it had like a 6-foot wingspan. But all of that, since it was on the walking legs, everything was much more condensed. But the Dragon Slayer dragon, having 4 legs and being more beefy, required to have like a foil or a surface that could hold it up convincingly.
Well, that's interesting you say convincingly, because that's one of the things that I find so fascinating, because the designs that you've created for the various dragons are all very, very different. And I'm curious about when you start thinking about and conceptualizing what something is going to look like. Clearly, you have the script, you have input from the filmmakers and maybe the producers, but how do you personally start to kind of think about what that that character, in this case, Draco, would look like? Like you've talked a little bit about the food dogs, and I'm curious about how you start thinking in your mind, how you started to create what that would look like. Like, did you start looking at photos or pictures, or did you just have ideas in the back of your mind that sort of started coming out? And how does that change as you start looking at these other things? So as you start developing the fact that it's on 4 legs and a little bulkier, you need wings, like you just talked about. I'm really curious about that process and how that came together for this project.
Well, on Dragon Slayer, Matt, the producer, and Hal Barwood, the producer, and Matt, the director, had been working with a marin artist near where they lived in Inverness, up in the Bay Area, Dave Bennett. And Dave had done a number of designs for what Matt and Hal wanted, but they just needed to be taken a lot further. And so I took his basic concept that was based on what Matt and Hal wanted, which was like a really crotchety, old, mean thing that had been around way too long, and it was ready to die, but it just hated everything. And so I just took that and ran with it, and what my general approach was back then for Empire and pretty much everything was I did a lot of notes. I would actually make up, I got involved with really complicated dance scenarios and locomotion scenarios that plotted footfalls on things in time and in space. And looked at a lot of documentary footage of like Komodo dragons and how they walked, and built up a legal pad, you know, it's like a telephone book of like notes. And so that was my working MO for a while. As I was gaining, you know, more skill, I just had to do as much research and pre-visualization as possible. And eventually I didn't have to do that anymore. You know, it just became very intuitive. But at that stage, you know, I had all of these notes, and it came time to shoot, and I just threw the notes in the garbage can, and just approached it intuitively because I had already done all the work. It was the same thing with dinosaurs. You know, as a kid, I'd studied dinosaurs, so I was like the perfect guy to be hired on Jurassic Park, you know, because I knew dinosaurs and I knew the production process. So it was just like a kind of a no-brainer. In fact, I mean, Steven was looking for someone to, you know, had the performances for Jurassic Park, and was asking George, and George said, "Phil's your guy, you know, he knows all that stuff," because he was aware of the short film that I made. And so that was the process for Dragon Slayer. DragonHeart was different in that they didn't have a design, they didn't know where to go, and that's where I came in to you know, suggest these things. Rafaela was just like, I don't think she liked me very much. They're too expensive, and so she put up.
But isn't that what all the producers say?
No, not at all. No. I mean, there are always issues with budgets, and you work around them. But I mean, things are a lot more contentious now than they used to be. You know, the producers would really back you up, and now they attempt to destroy you. You know, they just won't pay you, you know, when the money's due. So yeah, on DragonHeart, it was more of pretty much how I generally worked. I worked through Pete, who was a very competent sculptor, and kind of threw out a wide net, which is what I do. Like, say, in designing like the Tauntaun for Empire, George asked me to come up with some designs for the Tauntaun. And I spent a couple of days doing some drawings. It could be this, it could be that, it could be this, it could be that, and sent those up to him. And he picked one and asked to see the three-dimensional maquette of it. And he said that's the Tauntaun. And so once I started, you know, working up at ILM in the Bay Area, I used that as the reference for the actual stop motion puppet. Or, yeah, and so I did the same thing with Pete and DragonHeart, and then Steve Price, the visual effects supervisor, and I would go up to Rob's cabin in Lake Tahoe and lay all these things out on the coffee table, and you know, just discuss things. And what if we did this? What if we did that? We could do this. What if we do that? Oh, look, that means we could do this, and then we could do that. And but you know, we should stay away from this or that. You know, so that was just the thing. Odd little anecdote was that years later, I was talking to Rob about some other project, and he said his house in Lake Tahoe had burned down, burned to the ground. But the only thing that survived was one of these little maquettes that Pete had made. You know, somehow it didn't completely get consumed in the flames. So.
Wow, that's quite the story for sure. You touch on something that, and you brought him up a couple of times, and I was curious about this. Your working relationship with Pete Koning, you guys have been working together for a long time, but this was pretty early on in your partnership, was it not? And I'm curious about, you know, how you two met and what it is about working with Pete that, why do you two work so well together?
Well, I met Pete. I don't know. I mean, Pete was like a teenager basically when I met him, and there was a girl that I think had gone to school with him that lived in our neighborhood, and Pete wanted to meet me, and he showed me stuff, and I could see he was like really talented, but he didn't have any hands-on experience. So I told him, listen, here's what you do. You move to Los Angeles, you get your feet wet, go work for Rick Baker or, ADI or Rob Bottin or whoever, and work at as many places as you can and just do gig work. And then, in 3 or 4 years, come back to me and show me what you got. And he did, and it was good. And so that was the beginning of the relationship.
Well, how do you guys work together? Like, do you sketch together, or do you give him sketches, or do you just explain what you're looking for and he goes off and does it? I'm curious what that process is like. And
Yeah, I might do some like really rough sketches, that, I always insist that, I do not micromanage at all. I really insist that, people take an idea, it's just an idea, and run with it. So maybe I would, there would be certain parameters like the configuration of the mouth or the configuration of the wings or the articulation of the hands so that it could do hand acting. And primarily it would be through poses that would suggest a character. Like Pete did some designs where the dragon was laying down and had its elbow on the ground, and it had like a little miniature knight in the thing, and the dragon would be looking at the knight and gesturing like this, and just simple things like that you get a gestalt for. Oh, that's a totally reasonable dragon. He's not eating the guy, he's talking to him.
You've talked a little bit about, in the past, you've talked a little bit about the design and how you had to also keep in mind the fact that this was a buddy movie. And there is such a disparity between the size of, our lead character and the dragon. So can you talk a little bit about how that sort of plays into your designs as well, and how it played into the design here? The idea of framing and the projection of the film and how it was going to go out. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I don't remember exactly. I know that our preference, I don't remember what the format it was shot in, but I do recall that on Jurassic Park it was very clear because of the animals that it really needed to be a 185 show and not a 240 show, or 235 they called back then. And so that the dinosaurs would fit within that frame more comfortably. And so I'm pretty sure that's what we did for DragonHeart as well. I don't think it was anamorphic, but anyway, that was a major consideration in terms of the scale. I mean, that's something you just kind of, that's really easy to do. You make a dragon, and then you get a bunch of model soldiers, of different scales, and you put them in. It could be this, it could be that. You just go, oh, that one. That feels right.
Rob talked a little bit about this design of the jaw, which I thought was really, really fascinating. And then I was wondering how that was incorporated too into the design of the dragon itself. He was talking about the dislocated jaw they took.
Well, yeah, I totally forgot about that. Yeah, because, and I don't remember why. I mean, I guess it had to eat something pretty big.
What? Yeah, it had to eat your lead.
Oh, that's right. He ended up in the mouth. Yeah, there actually, once we got to that design, there were a lot of different kinds of maquettes that we had done to show how the jaw needed to be double hinged, kind of like a rattlesnake. And yeah, there was a lot of back and forth, just working out the engineering of that to make it work, number one, and to make it look good and work as well.
I'm curious, did you spend time on set as well once they actually started filming, or was all your work done before that?
All my work was pre-production. I was done, and they really never called me in to look at anything. I mean, after I left ILM, Dennis would call me in as a second set of eyes to look at stuff, but there was a tiny bit of contention with the computer graphics guys, because they were, I analogize it to being the old gunslinger and the new gunslinger, and so they want to have their day in the spotlight, and didn't want it taken away, which whatever, fine with me, I don't care. And I mean, they knew a lot of stuff that I didn't know, and I was still learning. One thing I did know, that I would never be a computer graphics animator or anything. I would never sit at a desk and work ever. So, that was out, but it just so happened that I kind of kicked myself upstairs and, was working more in a supervisory or design capacity. And so I never had to learn any of that stuff. I had no idea how to turn on, Maya or anything.
I think it's really fascinating because you're clearly somebody that's very embedded in sort of the past, but you're also at the forefront of a lot of technology. Like, the fact that you used some new tech here, and you're always kind of just like on the verge of that new thing. Like I was listening to an interview with you from a couple of years ago where you were talking about working in immersive technologies in China. So it's really fascinating to me that you kind of walk this fine line between, the past and the future, not even the present. It's like the past and what's coming that we haven't thought about. And I think that's such a fascinating dichotomy. And I'm curious about what is it that drives you to look for that next thing?
Some of it is just serendipitous, when the first Star Wars was being shot, ILM was in Van Nuys, California, and Dennis Muren and Ken Ralston were on the night crew. And I'd go have dinner with them and check out what they were doing, and got to meet, Lauren and, Joe Johnston, and saw their motion control setup that they had there, and started thinking, you know what, if you could hook up a stop motion puppet to this kind of stuff, the potential exists for being able to get motion blur on a puppet, which is something stop motion animators have been trying to do since Ladislav Starovich, to not very good results. Very painstaking. I mean, Starovich's stuff was really simple and it kind of worked, but other stuff like painting on glass with Vaseline, it was awful. And so on Empire, one of the first things that we did was I got together with Ken Ralston, who was doing camera, and I had a puppet left over from a movie I did with John Davison and Joe Dante called Piranha. It was a little aquatic animal, two-legged thing. And I had that puppet. I hadn't built the Tauntaun yet, and we hooked it up to the motion control rig and shot a number of tests. And it was just one axis, but it totally worked, And so that's what we were going to do. And then subsequently, we developed much more complicated, kind of like Bunraku puppets that had all these XYZ motors on it. And that was like really a pain in the ass to get those performances, because I just had to retrain how I created a performance. It's just with stop motion, you're literally sculpting in time and space and using light a lot, as you would in the sculpture, to figure out like the right angles and the right key poses and the right moves. And I lost my train of thought. What were we talking about?
We were talking about a foot in the past and the foot in the future. And
oh yeah. So yeah, and then we continued to develop the Go Motion stuff. Uh, and then that got very complicated and elaborate. And again, I had to, that's where I lost my train of thought. Stop motion is sculpting in space and time, but because of all these XYZ motors, you had to visualize the performance in your mind. You just had to see it. And then you had to break that down into axes. So you had to, it was like disco. It was like laying in one track at a time, forward momentum. And a leg would be, all you would do is after you laid in the forward momentum, lay in forward momentum, then you'd layer in like up and down and up and down. Then you'd layer in one leg at a time, leg up, and you just let that run for the entire length. And then you run it back and you run it forward and then leg down, leg up, leg down, do that to all the legs, over, one axis, two axis, three axis, and build up a performance that way. And it took a long time. I mean, we had concrete floors in the animation bay, and I got like these industrial rubber mats that they use for, cooking in, big restaurants. And I had a 4x4 mat, and I would just stand on that for like 15 hours a day and just concentrate. And I worked with a assistant camera person, and we had to equivocate. Our computer was like one of the first like little Macs like that, and the Go Motion designer Stuart Ziff, worked with Gary Leo, who's the computer guy, and what they did was they figured out pulses that came from the stepper motors, and then we did the math. Bess Wiley was the assistant camera, and so while I had at that time, all the spaceships were shot using joysticks, but they were velocity. You just turn them and they either move faster or they move slower. Not later on we developed a thing that Bill Tondro did that was a single frame thing that was a lot more intuitive for me. But I had to know where I was temporally. I could see where I was in space, but I needed to equivocate time. And so Bess would had a chart, and she would look at the chart and see what the pulses were, and then equivocate that with frames. So she would go 6, 12, 18, 24, 28, and so there I had kind of a compass that showed me where I was in time, and built performances like that, one bit at a time. And then once it came to actually shooting, I would say that at least 75, 80%, maybe a little bit more, were done with the GoGo Motion rod puppet. And then I would add stop motion for parts that we weren't hooked up to, like say the head and the neck, or fingers and things like that.
And so how do you, it seems like it's a bit out of necessity that you start sort of exploring new technologies and how you can, it's basically always about how to improve what you're working on, right?
Well, yeah, and sometimes, with the computer revolution, there was no choice. It was either you move in that direction or you don't move at all. But what it allowed you to do is like all sorts of things, that were much more complicated. With computer graphics, you're not tied to materiality at all. And so for a stop motion puppet to lift off the ground, if it's running, you have to have like all these complicated weird rigs that you had to light specially, and then you didn't have to do that anymore. you know, and or hook it up to a Go Motion machine because you've got motion blur. The motion blur in computer graphics is not good, and it looks very different from actual 180-degree shutter. I don't know why they haven't got it right, but it just feels not right. But nobody cares about that. So yeah, it's just a matter of adapting to what the technology gives you, and making the best of it. You know, it's like so by the time we had a well-oiled machine with the Go Motion, it was kind of like we built the Stradivarius. And then I felt that with computer graphics, we're kind of like given a fiddle. And so, you know, it took everybody, our learning curve for everybody was like, just like that. And so it just took us time to adapt and see what worked and see what didn't.
One of the things that I find really fascinating is that as far as we've come with computer graphics and visual effects, there is a tangibility to like some of the first iterations of CG that feel they just age so well in comparison to some of the new stuff, and I can't quite figure out why. And I wonder if maybe some of it is because you were still using some of the classic technology, like the fact that you designed, like you actually create a maquette for Draco, that might play into it. The fact that there were actual like physical versions of the dinosaurs, maybe that had something to do with it. Do you think that maybe we're relying too much on the computer graphics and kind of the fact that we're maybe not forgetting, but not making use of some of this old technology is actually setting us?
I don't know about that. I mean, I think, you know, what it comes down to is knowledge and skill, you know, and some people have more than others. I mean, you look at Jurassic Park and Starship Troopers that I did at my studio, and it's better than most crap you see today, you know, and it really holds up. Why is that? You know, what is it about that? And for Jurassic, it was pretty much me and Dennis in terms of look. There were a lot of other people that were, you know, very involved in look, like Stefan Fangmeyer and you know, just a bunch of people that were Mark DePay and oh God, my old man brain doesn't, you know, it's so full of things that I can't think of anything. Yeah, it was that, you know, pretty much Dennis and me for performance. And I was helpful in helping David Captain Spielberg find better dinosaurs to put in the movie than what was in the Crichton book. So, you know, it's being helpful in that way and just making sure that everything's as good as you can get it. And same thing with Starship Troopers. That was pretty much me and Craig Hayes, you know, and it was very daunting. And how I was freaked out. I had no idea how we were going to do thousands of bugs, and there weren't that many good computer people out there at all to hire. And so I was apoplectic. And one night I had a dream, and in the dream I had a bamboo pole that was about this thick and like 20 feet long. And at either end, there were macrame seats that John Davison and Alan Marshall, the two producers, would sit in. And I had to take them up a precipitous path that was only about that wide, thousands of feet straight up into a precipitous plunge into a boiling sea and rocks. And then I got up there, you know, 2,000 feet up, and there was like a 90-degree turn. Like that. It was like, I can't do this. I am terrified of heights. And in this dream, I was really terrified. And I had to make this 90-degree turn, but I couldn't. But another side of me said, you have to. And then the other side said, no, you don't. And I just went back and forth like that until I realized, okay, you have to do this. And so I had to figure out a way of doing it. And so I channeled Philippe Petit, you know, the guy that walked across the Twin Towers on a cable. And that was it. You know, it was just like one foot in front of the other. Don't think about anything other than, you know, the footstep that you're taking, not the one you're going to take, not the one you took, just there. And that's how I did it. That's how I was able to get through. And I think that's, you know, many people that, I mean, I didn't have the skill level and the confidence to know how to manage something of that magnitude at that time. So that was just a tremendous learning curve, you know, for me. And a technique that you know what, I knew it all the time. I've used that technique all the time, except I didn't know I knew it, you know, because I had intuited all of this other stuff. I didn't know what I knew, you know. And so yeah, so it's that kind of thing that you know, is I think allows you to break ground. And you know, Dennis and I were talking about this. You know, there's this a certain point the studios didn't like to have people that were at like say ILM or Tippett Studio producing the work or being the supervisors, and things were beginning to get broken up to like other shops because there were more and more shots and not everybody could handle all the work. And so the studios would hire their visual effects supervisors and producers, some of whom were really great experienced people, some of them were fucking idiots and really not prepared for the work that they were doing. And so they would make up shit because they didn't know what they were looking at. They had no way of understanding the process, you know, or you have to have faith in the process, you know, as you're doing it, because that's how everything works. You can't do it without the faith and belief that you know you're going to get it. So you get micromanaged, and I've got tons of stories that are just, to me, dumbfoundingly, you know, and like super frustrating. You know, I would tell my guys at my studio on like stupid shows, you know, listen, guys, I take them out back and, you know, buy a 6-pack of beer and sit them down and say, here's what you need to do. You need to psychologically divest yourself creatively from this project, because if you don't, you will be a basket case. So what you do is you need to visualize that you're working for a wealthy matron in Manhattan, and you're moving furniture in her apartment, and you say, where do you want it, lady? And she says, over the corner near the window, and you put it there, and she goes like, can you move it 3 inches this way? No, 6 inches the other way. What would it look like on the other side of the room? What if we put the couch on the ceiling? It looks like, and you know, but that's all you do. You just say, where do you want it, lady? And you color in the blanks, and you know, most of the time it's wrong, you know, but then it's their decision, you know. But you know, everybody needs a goat, and you know, I have been a goat, you know, many times. They need an out. Usually, in those kind of situations, the scenario is doomed, and so someone has to be blamed. And I've been blamed a few times. You know, sometimes it's other people. But Dennis and I would talk about this issue of the studio producer, visual effects supervisor, and we were recalling, you know, back in the day, you know, what the people on the studio side, the not good ones, would because the good ones always trust the process. Oh, you do this stuff. Okay, you go ahead and do it, and we'll make it work. And these other guys would just nitpick everything and try and find out what was wrong. What's wrong with this shot? What's wrong? And I was listening in on, I wasn't supervising this show, but Blair was. And there was a supervisor, they were having a conference call and screening, looping the shot. And I stuck my head in the editorial, and it was silence. And you know, for like a minute, and this shot was just looping. I go, Blair, what's going on? And he goes, mm-mm. And then he asked the guy, hello, are you there? And the guy says, I'm just looking for something that's wrong. Really? You can't watch it once and tell? You know, and that's what Dennis and I were saying. Yeah, you know, we could see what was wrong the first time we ran it. We didn't need to loop it over and over again. We did for discussion purposes, but you saw what was wrong. You know, there was a hitch in the animation, needed to be reshot. There's a, you know, matte line. There's a light or something, or that frame didn't fire. And we never did that. You know, what was wrong was self-evident. All we thought about was what could be better. You know, what would be more fun? What would be more dramatic? What would be funnier? You know, and that's all we thought about, was what would make the movie better or the scene better, you know. So times have changed.
I'm curious about what fuels you now for the projects that you take on and the projects that you work on now. Like what is it that is keeping you motivated and inspired and wanting to keep working? I know you're working on an independent project that you've been working on for quite a while, Mad God. But on aside of that, you're also working on other things. So I'm curious about, you know, what it is now that drives you.
It depends. It's the job. You know, I am officially retired from, I mean, I've kind of been there, done that, and grew up in a time that was really fun and where your bosses were really supportive, and they're not anymore. And working for the Chinese is a pain in the ass, and getting paid from anybody is a pain in the ass. You know, it's just like, even you know, a place like Marvel, you know, or Disney, that are sitting on billions of dollars, you know, they won't pay you, you know, and you know, you have to threaten them to, you know, not deliver the work, you know, and then they get mad at you. You get a bad rap. So yeah, then you're the goat. And it's just, it was not fun for me anymore, but not always. Certain things have come up recently where on this Mad God project, I was archiving it as I shot a bunch of stuff on 35mm film 20 years earlier and was archiving it. And some of the guys at work were inspired by Star Wars and RoboCop and whatnot, and wanted to do that kind of stuff, but that train had left the station and it was all computer graphics, and so that's what they did. And they were, you know, highly skilled computer graphics guys, really good picture maker, and they saw me working on this thing, and they got inspired. They had no idea what they were looking at, and so some of the guys offered. They said, "Let us do a shot." And one thing led to the next, and ended up, you know, I'd give a talk at the local Berkeley Pacific Film Archives, and there'd be, you know, college students and high school students that would volunteer. So I got, like, you know, I would plan things out during the week, and then I could get as many as 15 or 20 people to come in and do heavy lifting on little fiddly things that would just take me 1,000 years to do, but I could get a crew of people to do that. And so that was really rewarding. We're almost completely done with that. There's just a few comps in sound and music that we finished. So we gotta, you know, get a release later this year. It's got to go through the film festivals first before it gets picked up anywhere. Although Alamo Drafthouse is gonna screen it theatrically in the States. So, you know, there was that going on. And then a year or so ago, I get a call from Jon Favreau and for Mandalorian. And John's the kind of guy that you want as your boss, because he operates a lot like Lucas does. And, you know, he hires the best people he can find and kind of leaves them alone. I mean, yeah, he tweaks things like everybody does, but it's just like, it's not the same kind of thing. It's the idea is, how do you make it better? How do you make it better? How do you make it better? And it's like, yeah, of course. Dave Fincher's the same way, you know. He's got a bad rap for being difficult, but, you know, the guys that I've worked with that did his, you know, a lot of his matte paintings, Craig Barron and Ken Rogerson, just said, yeah, he knows what he wanted and he was very clear about it. And then we did it and everything was fine. Nobody ever got yelled at. And so Favreau's like that. And he's like a huge stop motion fan and wanted to do stop motion for, was it the second season of, I think, episode 7 of Mandalorian. And so we built a stop motion Walker junkyard machine and did a handful of shots for that. And then we're working on a couple of other secret projects for them. They're just kind of, you know, developing. And yeah, it's very rewarding, especially for my guys, you know, that wanted to do this stuff, you know, because, you know, I can frame things, get things going, and, you know, and then they can do all the heavy lifting. And yeah, so it's worked out, you know, very well. If you got it's just signed up for some other really kind of interesting work that I'm going to be a lot more hands-on involved with, but I can't talk about it.
So much for being retired.
Well, yeah, I'm never going to get retired. I mean, I just stopped working because I couldn't stand it anymore. I was like the chef guy in Apocalypse Now when he walks into the jungle and sees the tiger and flips out. It was like, you know, I just can't do this anymore. I've had enough, you know. I don't have the emotional bandwidth anymore to deal with this nonsense.
And eventually it all came back.
Somehow, yeah.
It's kind of amazing.
That's actually what I want to do too, is change the course. I don't want to do any more Chinese projects, but I would like to turn the studio back into a stop motion studio if that is at all possible. And there's a lot more interest in doing stop motion these days. Doesn't pay that well, but it's more rewarding, you know.
And do you find, you talk a little bit about how you do these talks for college students and high school students, and there's clearly an interest in stop motion. Do you see a future where we're going to see more stop motion than just, you know, a few short films here and there, and, you know, it may actually become more of a mainstream thing?
Doubt it. Yeah, I mean, I think the last few, it's mostly the you know, Tim Burton and Henry Selick type stuff that costs a lot to make, and the last few of them haven't made that much money, you know. But on the other hand, Guillermo's doing Pinocchio, you know, and Henry's doing something up there in where are they, Washington or Oregon, I forget. So yeah, there's interest in, you know, Guillermo's a big stop motion fan, you know, stop mo's what Henry does. So, you know, it's all alive.
I'm curious, just to kind of start to wrap things up. Did you ever think that you would end up where you are today? Like when you were a kid watching, you know, the movies that inspired you, did you ever think that this would be where you would end up?
No, I'm in a constant state of amazement by it. You know, it was just like everything I have wished for in life has come true. Everything. I've never had a huge impediment. I've never been sick. I've never broken a bone. And I've escaped some like really life-threatening situations, you know, a handful of times. But, you know, I'm here. And it leads me to believe that I am in a simulation. I honestly suspect that is the case, you know, because things don't usually work out that well. And, you know, I'm sure, you know, after saying this, it's like, you know, a rock will fall from space and, you know, turn me into a fireball. But yeah, I'm amazed.
I certainly hope there is no fireball or no rock, because I really want to see all of the projects that you're working on, and your work is amazing. Thank you so much for giving us your time today and talking to me. It's been so much fun and so informative. And, you know, for those that haven't seen any of your work or DragonHeart, which is, you know, celebrating, I still can't believe 30 years, but all of your work has held up so well over the decades. I mean, they could kind of start anywhere. I'm curious, do you have a favorite movie? Like if somebody wanted, no?
Oh, you know, I have, I ascribe to the Verna Field School of filmmaking. When she wrote, or the great Universal editor, wrote a book, and she said, you know, if you're lucky, you'll work on 2 or 3, you know, movies that are, you know, accepted well. And the rest are like, yeah, whatever. Some are, you know, good, some are bad, but what you end up walking away with are the memories of the people that you've worked with, you know. And yeah, that's the way it worked. I mean, I worked on a number of the Twilight movies that I thought were awful. And but I worked with some great people, the directors Chris Weitz and Bill Condon. I just loved them. And the crews that I had were really terrific. We were like a big family, you know. We had dinner every night and would hang out on the weekends and go to movies. And yeah, it was just like a big family. So, you know, that show was my last show that I actually supervised on location. And yeah, so that was a great way to end things, just to walk away with that, you know, that good taste in your mouth as opposed to shit.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I really
Hey, you know, keep posted. Mad God will get its release later this year once the pandemic calms down through Alamo Drafthouse, and then once I get some notice from some film festivals, hopefully I'll get picked up by a screening service. So yeah, it's it will be ready to be released, and that's probably 90–80% stop motion, and then like other kinds of effects.
So is that the 3 projects like together as one cohesive story, or is it like a part 4?
No, it's the first 3 were funded by Kickstarter. And so I did those as chapters, and then I got some backing from some friends that had a lot of money, and then I sold a lot of artifacts through the prop store and made money that way and turned it back into the movie. So I don't throw anything away. I mean, all this crap you see behind me, I've got to deal with before I die, so I don't leave it for my daughters to have to throw away. So yeah.
You're too much. You're too much. Oh, I'm excited about the movie. That's fantastic. I'll have to reach out to you for Spark Animation. Hopefully.
Yeah. So yeah, those first 3 are roughly the first half, 45 minutes. Okay. So the whole feature is like 80+ minutes.
That's so awesome. Okay, great. Well, I'm definitely going to stay in touch, and you're going to hear from me, because I'd love to see that for the festival. That'd be awesome.
Okay, great.
Awesome. Again, Phil, thank you so much for your time. It was so much fun.
My pleasure. Okay, take
enjoy
care.
the rest of your Friday and the weekend.
Yeah, well, stay warm.
I'll try.
Okay.
Bye.